final panel is called Growth, Investors, Funding, and You. And I want to give a shout out to Mike from Lattice because he was the first person to reach out and get this space. He's helped sponsor the event, and he's been really helpful at organizing the community. So let's get up for Lattice, and let's get up for Mike. I want to give a shout. He's very patient with all my emails about this. Our panelists today are experts in the field of investors and funding, and will share their valuable insights on what they look for in founders and companies building on a permanent internet. We'll also discuss the future of Arweave, which we did a bit in the last panel, and dive into the challenges of gaining traction for Arweave assets beyond the ecosystem and the important support that seed companies need to overcome hurdles. So let's go down, and do you each want to introduce yourself and talk a little about what you do and your organization?
Yeah, 100%. Nice to meet everyone. I'm Anthony, investor, started Hansa. We invest, incubate, and accelerate companies, especially in the Arweave ecosystem. So we've been first investors in projects like Arweave, Stability AI, and a few other really interesting things.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Sebastian. I'm the CEO of Forward Research. Been working in Arweave-related entities for now almost 4 years, working with Sam for 5 years, over 5 years now. And yeah, do a bunch of ops and also a lot of the investments into the portfolios, companies that we have running for a bunch of time now. So yeah, that's what I do here.
I want to also thank Sebastian Forward Research for sponsoring today too.
Oh,
make some noise.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. You saw his son earlier on stage. Who do we got next?
Yeah, we're related. I'm Joe Berebaum. I'm a founder of a company called Arweave. That was actually named before I was in the ecosystem, but it kind of fits into the ecosystem actually. We build products on the Arweave blockchain. Our first product is called AFTR.Market, which is a smart contract on-chain multi-sig wallet and asset management tool. And yeah, and I'm related to Tate, as some of you know.
Hey everyone, I'm Mike Zajko from Lattice. Andrew, thanks for the kind introduction. Lattice is an early stage crypto venture fund. We've been around for about 1.5 years now, and we were inspired to host or help host this event. We're investors in Redstone Warp, and we felt like more people needed to learn and understand what Arweave is trying to do. There wasn't any event happening, so we said we should do something, and then fortunately we found you, and you were leading the charge. So we really helped out in finding a brewery, which is awesome. Anyhow, we think it's one of the most exciting ecosystems because one of the real challenges with a lot of Web3 projects is like you're typically building some analog to what exists today. So people have they kind of struggle to understand like, why should I move over from this thing that I already use and it kind of works for me. And Arweave is unique because it's kind of like nothing exists quite like it prior to Arweave existing. So we think that's super exciting, and that a lot of primitives and new stuff will be born out of that. And it's also one of the most like genuine organic ecosystems I think in Web3 today.
And you know a lot of different ecosystems. You have a good overview of this community.
We try to, but thanks.
That's great. Okay, so I'm gonna ask some specific questions, and then we'll have some group questions. But Anthony, so Hansa, you were the first and amongst the first investors in Arweave, Stable Diffusion, and more. And now you have a fund dedicated to the Arweave ecosystem. So what are the most important factors you look for in founders, especially those building on the permanent internet?
Yeah, 100%. So apart from if we could have digital twins of our best founders in the portfolio, that'd be really interesting. But I think the key characteristics of good founders is persistence and curiosity. The ability to actually set goals and go out and actually execute on them is another big one. And then the best founders really see the world in a different way. There's, I guess, secrets hiding in plain sight is the best way of describing it, and they're the ones that can actually go out, see it, and I guess put that idea into the world, which is the hardest thing to actually do.
So it's this like triforce of they have to have the artistic vision to see something that needs to be possible, the technical dev knowledge, and the business acumen to kind of connect that triangle. That's like a really hard diagram to find, huh?
Startups are really hard. It's as simple as that, yeah.
That's cool. Thank you. That was a really good answer. Sebastian, so you are deep in the Arweave world. You're with Forward Research, doing so much work. The Entrepreneur in Residence program has brought amazing things to the permaweb, including stamps, renders, Alex archives, and soon fact markets. So how does Forward look at the future of Arweave? Is it the future of protocols or companies, or is it like a fusion of those two things?
And definitely not necessarily like traditional companies. So I think it's more about, protocols and the way in which folks can just like come on, create something that is unique, that uses the unique capabilities of permanent storage. That is not something that is very common to have around, true permanent storage. And then just decide to turn over to a community or go and build something else. Like the idea that what we're looking for is looking for founders. We're not looking for CEOs. We're not looking for people that want to build a specific company and then keep running it forever. We want, part of the cool thing about building on Arweave is that it doesn't require maintenance. You can just spin something up and then move on to build something else. And so that's sort of one of the cool things about it that we're constantly looking for. And I think that the current batch that we have for Founders in Residence really has that, besides being super kick-ass people.
How many do you have currently? Do you know?
We have 4.
4.
Yep.
And is it a annual thing, or is it just kind of like no timeline?
On a rolling basis, but normally it will take, we're probably never going to be working with more than 5 on parallel, simply because it requires a lot of time. This is not something that we want to be like churning out constantly. We actually want to give sufficient time for these projects to develop, to get to a point where there's really like product market fit, and that actually takes time and takes a lot of effort. So you can't have like 20 in parallel.
So a lot of the challenges is creating longevity beyond the hype, and that's kind of like the philosophical underpinning of Arweave, right? Like longevity, looking to the future, and that's cool. So it's a balance though, because like y'all need to make your money back. Hey.
Right, but those things will make money if they're useful and if they don't succumb to the initial early stage pressures that sometimes these projects are put towards, right? So allowing this thing to like grow organically with the right founders is the right approach for us, at least.
And you put faith in these specific people. That's awesome. It says a lot.
Yeah. I mean, they earn it, so.
That's cool. Thank you. Great answers. So Joe, AFTR.Market is building to make on-chain governance and asset management for permaweb builders easier than ever. We did a really great Rcast last year, and you explained it really well, and it was a really good episode. So using tools like Warp contracts in EXM coming online, is there anything holding back Arweave assets, like profit sharing tokens, from gaining traction beyond the Arweave ecosystem? And maybe explain a little bit about AFTR.Market.
I think the short answer to your question is liquidity, but that's the easy answer. And I think historically, louder. Sorry, how's this?
Perfect.
Okay. I think the easy way to look at that, or I'm sorry, historically, that's done in several ways, and there's teams probably in this room that are working on those problems today. On-chain, on and off ramping for fiat currencies, bridging, partnering with centralized exchanges are some of the ways that's done in other ecosystems. But I think if we dive a little bit deeper and we think about, well, let me ask a question to the audience. How many of you were around for the .com boom? And maybe a better question is, how many of you were old enough to actually experience it, right? But I mean, the World Wide Web is something we use every day. The protocol behind the World Wide Web wasn't created until 1989. And really the .com boom didn't happen until the late 90s, for what everyone really recognizes as the .com boom. And so what happened in that almost decade to get to the explosive growth? And I think if you, I don't know if I did that, but.
Oh, no, that wasn't you, no. You're doing good.
Yeah, it was explosive. So I think if you look back at that time period, you'll see a striking resemblance to what's going on in the Arweave ecosystem today. In the early 90s, the World Wide Web was created. People started sharing, websites and started to understand that, okay, we can interact on the web in this manner. Infrastructure had to be built. And then, people were using personal computers in the 80s. They were using personal computers at work, and then in the early 90s, they became more prevalent, more available at home, and affordable. And so as people started using computers more and more, behavior changed, and so then also what was happening in the early 90s was the rise of venture capital. And they were heavily investing in technology companies. And so, and what that created was new business models and e-commerce. And so all of that, kind of confluence is what created the dot-com boom. And so if you fast forward and think about, when Arweave was created, we had Arweave's creation, then we had infrastructure being built, SmartWeave came out, hundreds of millions of dollars of capital was flowing into the ecosystem. What was that capital being invested in? Infrastructure, just like what we saw in the 90s. Web3 and DeFi started to take off. That's starting to change consumer behavior. So it's really almost identical to what happened in the 90s. So I think we're right on track. And I think what's important is that the protocols and the products that are being built you don't innovate in a vacuum, which I think is something that is good about this community. People are very open and honest, and I also think it's important that we really think about interoperability as we're building. So yeah, I think we're right on track in a nutshell.
Because being tangential to the ETH conference, right? It's like trying to build with other people and other ecosystems in blockchain. And thinking about the history of the web, like when Tim Berners-Lee came up with the HTTP protocol, he didn't necessarily monetize it, right? So it was like an interesting thing where he's this legend of early internet, and people were able to build on it and monetize and grow and create the profitable, eventually Web 2 world we know, and now Web 3. So the idea that being able to incubate these things that aren't necessarily profit motivated and have faith in in their longevity is, I think, something really special about Arweave. It's interesting about AFTR.Market, like bringing together the profit sharing tokens in a way where you can then kind of support this creativity, but also monetize the back end. So I think that's kind of cool what you're working on.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, you asked me about AFTR.Market. So AFTR.Market, we feel that if Arweave is going to be the web of value, a multi-sig protocol is a primitive in that world, and so that's what we're trying to build, and we just went live a couple weeks ago. I think a week ago released a library to basically create an AFTR repo in 2 lines of code. So we're trying to do our part and make our product as interoperable as possible.
That's awesome. Thank you. So Mike, let's talk about Lattice. So growth for seed companies can be a challenging hurdle. So what does Lattice do for their portcos to help them get over the first hurdle, whether it be marketing or technical?
Yeah, so this event is a good example of the kind of stuff we do. In the case of Redstone and Warp, we recognize that there were still a lot of people, and clearly to this day, that don't really understand Arweave, and we felt like, while we're not necessarily investors as a fund in Arweave right now, one of our portfolio companies can benefit dramatically from increased awareness of what's happening here, and then by virtue of that, people will find out about Warp and SmartWeave. So helping to organize this or similar styles of events, not like we're an event planner, but finding out whatever we think is necessary that's going to accelerate their growth. Other things that I think we tend to focus on in crypto, a lot of things actually, while I think the early days there was kind of an ethos of if you build it, they will come, and hopefully that happens. The reality is that doesn't always happen. So you need to go out, find customers, build up some muscle on business development or sales, and get that first set of customers that you can use as proof points for the next set of customers, the next set of customers. So things like just simple stuff, helping them build out a pipeline, finding connections with those, those teams, with the sales process, or once that happens, to highlight that and market it and drive additional awareness around it. So I think, as a fund, like both myself and my co-founder Regan, we're not technical, so we'll try to help us drive as much value outside of those areas where we don't think we can help out as much. And Joe, I did want to say, like, we had this moment right before we came up on the stage, and he was like, "Hey, I remember you. We talked at one point," and I was like, "Well, I forget." And now I remember, because at the end of the conversation, you said, "The round's done. We already raised the money," so we try to block out those things where we can't get into the round. But anyway, it's good to reconnect. But yeah, definitely, anything that we think is necessary that will drive those early stages of growth. And considering we're investing at pre-seed and seed, like, this isn't about scaling a huge organization. It's really about like that more 0 to 1 moment and finding out like who your customers are and how you can best support them.
Yeah, and being aware of the community, right? Because if you're investing in different ecosystems, you really have to know who the influencers are in each one. And it's like this idea of the diffusion of influence is this sociological phenomenon where it's kind of like a graph that goes like that, and so you have a certain percentage. You have like the early adopters, then you have the influencers. I'm not getting it perfectly right, but by the end, it's like everyone's parents, right? By the time you get over the whole graph. So you have to figure out strategically where the right points are in this graph to make things cross over, which is, I think, pretty fun, right?
Totally. And, I think, as a fund also, like, there's 3 people on our investment team. We also can't invest in all ecosystems, because like even here, I don't know, there's probably like a dozen ecosystems, a bunch of little L1s, and to try to cover all of them. So, we really prioritize where we think the most long-term potential is, and that's, one of the reasons our logo is up on the screen.
That's dope. Well, thank you. So, no, great answer. So here's a question for everyone, and I think this will lead to some interesting dialogue. So network is net worth. What's the best way to make inroads with investors? Is it just to build? So anyone watching, any devs and people creating startups at home, like, this might be some inside the Actors Workshop background info. Like, what's the way for them to get the attention of people like you or people in your world? Create cool stuff? I don't know.
Solve challenging problems. Build relationships early is the easiest way, because it's a long partnership together for the long term. And then founders and investors can see progress and how you actually track towards it over time.
So them building relationships in the ecosystem early on in their projects is helpful, right? Exactly.
Talk to as many people as possible, get to them to challenge your assumptions, and keep reiterating and reiterating.
And maybe creating a bubble of people whose opinion you trust, right? If you're a creative entrepreneur, because like you might tell your brother and he might be like, "Jerry, I don't think people want to make memory gardens." And you'd be like, "But it's awesome." Memory gardens, shout out to Ben and Memory Gardens. Like, I don't know if you have a brother named Jerry, but I'm just saying, well, you create something awesome and you believe in it, you know what I mean? So it's like, who do you listen to? You know what I mean? That's a good question.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's up to the individual founder to see who to listen to and who to trust. I think you can draw insights out of anyone in a particular area as well, which is interesting, because every single individual has a different perspective on the world and everything else. So I think if you actually take in that information and synthesize it yourself in a really careful and rigorous way, then it'll actually propel you forward.
That is like a key to life, right? Because it's like you're going to get so much information on what you should do with your heroic journey. And like some people have really good advice and some people have advice that might be good for someone else, right? So interesting, very philosophical. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, does anyone else want to answer that?
I think it's true. The question that you asked about, is it just to build? I think that there's a lot of teams that are full of a bunch of builders or maybe a few builders, but that's the easy thing to do. That's what builders want to do. And I think that what teams are really starting to learn is that sometimes you have to pause that process to really understand maybe what the current market is or what the market is going to be. And then structure your team so that you can iterate as quickly as possible when you figure those things out. So I think the answer to the question of is it just to build is probably, the answer is probably no. I think that's part of it.
Yeah, Joe, like if you're in a band, sometimes you just want to make beats. But no, you got to go out there and make the T-shirts. Like the answer to that is not just to make music, right? It's a similar thing. But the passion and joy, passion's been a theme throughout the day. Like that's got to be core in it too, though. You have to want to build.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's very wise words. Sebastian, like with the Entrepreneur in Residence program, if there are young people or anyone watching on the stream, what is something they could do to get the attention if they feel like it might be a great fit for forward research?
Yeah, just like a great idea, honestly. Like we are pursuing ideas that perhaps other funds might not be in a position to pursue, and obviously being built on Arweave and using some of the cool implications of permanent storage. Like think about like innovative ways in which permanent storage allows you to do something, and that is something that we want to pursue, right? So we give you the freedom to explore those ideas and really like work through them, and we also give you guidance, but the idea is the thing that gets you in the beginning, right? So Justin from Permafacts relayed that anecdote before, that he had tweeted something and then Sam saw it and actually like started from there, right? And we started like just like working through that idea, and that's basically how it works. So very easily think about really seriously about permanent storage. What are the implications of that? And then like try to think about like, okay, how do I have something to contribute? Then we want to hear from you.
And it seems like with Arweave, one of the solutions you're trying to solve is there's this like galaxy of data, right? There's all this sand on this beach. And so the things that build on top of it that help organize and like make that sand accessible, those seem like exciting projects. That seemed like the theme of today, a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And perhaps even like taking a step backwards. So we care about things that are contributing, that create mechanisms to contribute data to Arweave, and then also mechanisms that help make that data available to others. So, if your idea fits into those two categories, then we definitely want to talk to you, because that's creating and the keyword here is mechanism. It's not just about like, having an app, but like making sure that people can contribute to Arweave and that it makes it in a sustainable way. That is something interesting to us.
So having the data be created and then curated and distributed.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
There's some sort of mechanism that makes it so, like that it incentivizes uploading, incentivizes sharing, thinking about some clever way of doing this. That's something that we want to focus on.
That's so exciting. I
so
get
too.
all excited when we talk about this. Mike, what about you with Lattice? What sort of stuff, what excites y'all when you're trying to invest in people, in ecosystems?
Yeah, I mean, the new idea, that's probably table stakes. And there's the classic stuff that every investor will say. They'll say, well, the team. And that's absolutely true. Obviously, someone that you believe in and feel like they'll persevere through multiple cycles is something that we're always looking out for. They're genuine in their interest in what they're building. It's not just some like mercenary attempt to make a quick buck. Something that really like perks our ears up is when we hear about something that we think dramatically expands the market in some capacity. So like whether that's a retail or consumer-oriented application that taps into a group of consumers that maybe isn't in crypto today, but we think it could appeal to them. Or on like the more institutional side, something that just makes it easier for them to get into the space. Arweave specific, I think like something that's kind of interesting, we're not investors in them, but bundlers here. And that's a really good example of a team that builds something that like, institutions, people I think about banks and that kind of thing, but like if you wanted an institution from like a data perspective to come into the ecosystem, be able to use Arweave, like they're gonna need something that makes it much easier and faster and more performant. And like that was an identified problem and they were able to fill that gap. So like anything that makes it easier on either like the retail side and like drives a lot of interest, new excitement, new entrance into the space, or something that like drives net new demand, whether it's money or data from like large power players in the traditional world or whatever you want to call it.
Bringing people into the ecosystem is like important. Would you say? Or
so I guess maybe this the way I would think about this, like if you looked at the past couple of cycles, and granted a lot of this was driven by speculative demand, but like a lot of people became interested in space with Bitcoin because there was some like hype, it was something new, and then with the ICOs a lot of people came into the space. And some people left, but like some people stuck around. They actually believed in what was being built and they became interested in it. And then after that it was like DeFi. So like you keep seeing new waves of people coming into the industry. either from like an interest perspective, an investment perspective, a usage perspective, but it's typically driven by some like new use case that we haven't seen before. And like, it's always like you say like, oh, like, how did you get into this? And they're like, oh, I was really kind of into finance and it just made sense to me. So therefore like I became interested in it. But like those typically aren't the same people that are also like, oh, NFTs just made total sense to me. So like that's what brought me into the space. So like we're looking for things that we believe will be appealable to not the like DeFi degens necessarily, because they're already here. It's just some new audience that like they get value out of something that's delivered by some decentralized protocol or application that, you know, that's going to be built.
And that, okay, so that is a theme that comes up a lot on the Rcast and in a lot of our meetings. And I'm wondering if you all agree with this or disagree with this, because you all have a lot of perspective on this. I've heard people say that the key to mass adoption for Web3 is invisibility. Now, I don't necessarily believe that myself. I think the technical side of it makes it interesting and exciting, but is there some truth to that statement? And have you all heard that before? Ooh.
I definitely have heard that before. And I think there's absolutely some truth to it. But I don't think there's anything wrong with projects leaning into, in some capacity, the financialization of like whatever they're doing, because clearly that's important to people. Like they want to make money or they want to like earn a living in some capacity. Even if you see things like Helium, which took off, and maybe it got a little bit ahead of itself in terms of its growth, matching up with the demand that was there. But clearly, like people got interested in because they were making money, but then they started to learn about it and they stuck around. And maybe not, like a decent amount of them stuck around. So like, I don't think there's any problem. You don't want to go crazy with like, this is purely based on financializing some new project, but like, I think there is a little bit of an expectation that there's some ownership, and usually ownership is tied to, some value. But usually what I say is like, we'll kind of know we've made it as an industry when like the people in this room, when they say to someone like in their normal life, they say, well, like I'm into crypto, and the first thing that you hear is not like what shitcoin should I buy. It's like, oh, I use this product or service and like I get a lot of value out of it and it's cool. We'll know like we've actually started to deliver like real functional value for people.
It's like, you've heard of crypto and they're like, no, you mean Arweave? That's cool. That is interesting. What do you all think about that idea that invisibility is the key to mass adoption?
Yeah, I think the Web3 world looks completely different in 3 to 5 years. It won't be like the hyper-financialization of everything and casinos existing everywhere. I think the opportunity actually is to rebuild institutions from the ground up. And I think to actually look, like if I was a founder looking for problems to solve, I'd look where trust has been eroded over time and where it's actually decreasing. And I think like obviously with Arweave it's media, and I think that's like the obvious use case. You've with Stability AI, you've got the ability to write a prompt and essentially generate images and videos and deepfakes and everything else. And I think in a year or two, then trust in like synthetic assets or online assets actually trends towards zero, and you actually need like proof of provenance and essentially traceability of assets online, which is basically another core foundation of what Arweave solves. So I think like the question about invisibility, I'm not 100% sure what invisibility means as such, but I think in like if you're looking at it from, is it frictionless, is it easy to use? I think that's coming, and I think the new tech that comes online in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years will make everything look like child's play in the previous 10 to 20.
Like looking back at how they used to explain HTTP, now everyone kind of understands that, hopefully, and like maybe the next generation will totally understand nodes and gateways and everything. So we won't need to explain it. It'll be part of the conversation, which I think is great, right? That's evolution and intelligence.
Yeah, 100%. The 99% of users don't need to know what HTTP is, or HTTPS, hopefully, and everything else. Yeah.
But they still like put their Tim Berners-Lee poster up, and they're like, "We lionize this man." No, I don't know. I'm just saying, like, there's like the people who are very deep into the social history of it, which Like Mike mentioned helium, and Sean Fanning, I think, was from Napster, was part of that back in the day. And so his idea for our generation, like Napster peer-to-peer, that to me, that helped me understand the idea of blockchain. It's very different, but it's like a similar thing. Like these people from the past can help tell these stories, and you're looking for those people to help amplify their visions, which is kind of cool. So maybe Web3 doesn't have to be invisible.
I think that when it comes to like, if invincibility is frictionless, then the same thing applies to like Web 2, right? Like no one wants to like really have to have a hard time engaging with something before they can actually do what they want it to do. So, you know, if it's easy, if you don't need to do a lot of steps in order to achieve what you want, yes, I think that that's important. But I also think that, you know, there's a fundamental difference between decentralized web services and the things that exist in Web 2. And so, you know, making those differences palpable and explaining those to people, so don't think, oh, it's all the same to me, you know, like you have, I don't know, you have long-term storage and you have permanent storage, you know, it's all the same to me. Well, it's actually not. It's very different, and I'm now, of course, mentioning Arweave, but this applies to any other thing, right? So different services, you need to make that explicit, that there's a difference, and why you as a consumer, you should be choosing something that empowers you and not that puts the power or keeps the power in the hands of a centralized organization that just exploits you over time.
This idea that you can make the world better, I don't know, there's some hope there, and that's why it's exciting to talk about this, personally speaking.
I think that's for the founders rather than investors per se.
Yeah, interesting. But you get to like figure out which gets amplified and who can quit their job doing whatever they don't want to do to do the project, right? But it's up to the founders, you're right.
Yeah, exactly. I think like capital allocation's a funny thing in itself.
I mean, I agree with what these guys say. I think in general, the average consumer probably thinks that their data is permanently stored. You know, like if it's in the cloud, it's stored, you know? I mean, you used to hear people say, oh, the internet's written in ink. So yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a strong opinion either way on that topic.
Yeah.
You know, I think Seb kind of hit it when he said it's about making, you know, building products that are easy to use. So it doesn't really matter. You know, they're just intuitive. It doesn't matter. User doesn't have to have a lot of knowledge to onboard into the ecosystem.
I mean, I think a great example of that is the perma pages, Tom's perma pages, right? Because it makes it so you can easily, it's like the old internet meets the new internet. It's like a good balance, you know, which is pretty cool. I'm wondering though, as we wrap up, Anthony, are there any like questions from the YouTube commenters? Because I know they're rabid.
Regulation around this stuff is murky at best, right? When you're talking to these companies and all that, does that ever play a factor in, you know, how you see them if you're going to invest in them? At what point does regulations around, you know, tokens and things like that come into play?
Should we consult with legal before we address this?
Not financial advice. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah. So when we talk to a project that we believe sits in a more risk-on position from a regulatory perspective, that we think would require, for instance, a fair amount of licensure or, you know, going out and actually working with regulators to get approved. Like, let's just say you wanted to, you know, start taking in fiat currency, so you needed money transmitter licenses. Part of it's like looking at the team and being like, is this the type of team that we believe has the credibility, the experience, the background to actually deliver that? Because that's not like necessarily a technology thing. It's probably more of a legal and operations background. So that's a bit of like how we think of it. So like we could be really excited about it, but if the team isn't a good fit for like the problems that they're trying to solve, like maybe they're great coders and designers, but like, you know, they've just never gone through the process of like applying for a broker dealer or something along those lines. So that might change our viewpoint in our consideration to invest, even if we like the idea. Just don't think there's a good, you know, founder to, you know, concept match. But as an investor in the space, as a founder in the space, you're going to have to be comfortable with a fair amount of risk in that all this could get squashed out at some point, and you're just taking that on. So I think we're already here. The risks that are present, like we've gotten comfortable with, but figuring out with a team if like they can deal with the adversity. Are they going to have the amount of money to get through the process of, if it's a long road? And then clearly, like if something is just like blatantly going to break the law, like we're not gonna work with them. But where it's a gray area or we think like murky, it's figuring out is the team have the capability to navigate uncertain or uncharted kind of territory and find a path through that.
So any other questions from the audience? Ben, my man, Memory Gardens, in effect.
So Mike, for you, when you invest in a company, what is more palatable for you? Tokenized asset or safe/convertible note?
I mean, the most popular
Great question.
instrument that we've been investing in is the safe plus a token warrant. That being said, like we'll buy whatever the founder's selling, and if they're like, hey, I don't want to have a token, I don't think I'll have a token, and we think there's a path for a really good outcome as an equity business, and like we're fine investing in that. So it's really not so much about the instrument versus like the team and the idea, et cetera. That being said, like I think most investors now are just protecting themselves if the team does decide at some point in the future, 2 years from now, even though they said they never were going to launch a token, having some insurance that they're going to have some rights to that. But it's become pretty standardized these days, and I think everyone's following a similar path until maybe at some point in the future we come up with a new form. But like it's gone through a few iterations. It was like people were selling tokens, it's kind of illegal. Then they started selling SAFs, also probably like not the greatest path. And now like we've kind of settled on this one, which seems to be working pretty well until maybe it doesn't or someone comes up with something new. But at least for the past year and a half, that like has been the standard.
Great questions all day, and I want to give this opportunity for our panelists to just give any final thoughts and maybe a shout out where people can learn more about your organizations.
Yeah, 100%. Go to Hansa.network. We've got a form that anyone can fill out. You don't need a warm introduction and everything else. We judge every idea on merit itself. We've got an accelerator for companies that are in their initial stages trying to get traction, run by the head of growth from Immutable, and we've got head of growth from Ledger, Polygon, and everything else in there to take you from 0 to 1. We write checks from 50K up to 2 million. We're really excited what everyone's building. I think shoot for the stars, rebuild institutions. These things are great for like human coordination problems, and we should actually use them for that.
Go on Twitter and look at FWD research. Just start following us and shoot us a DM if you have a really good idea. We want to talk to you, and we will talk to you like right away. You see, like Sam's checking those DMs. Everyone's checking those DMs constantly. So just and also like go to all these guys' websites and talk to them as well.
I think the best place is AFTR.Market, AFTR.Market. You can get to our Discord, our Telegram. It's an honor to be here. I appreciate you guys putting this on. If I haven't met you, please come up and introduce yourself. I recognize a lot of you. I know some of you, but I haven't met a lot of you. So I'd love to meet and connect and talk to you.
Yeah, you can find us at lattice.fund or on Twitter under I think lattice_fund. I guess I'll leave as kind of parting words. There are a lot of people here in Denver, which is awesome to see. But if you were here a year ago, it was just kind of pandemonium, nuts. Like bull market's still going. So you're all here, which is awesome. And like definitely take advantage of the time to form connections, because those will pay dividends, a year from now or 2 years from now when everyone's super busy again, and they're like, oh, I know him. Like we were together in Denver, like we hung out, you helped me in some capacity, and then like now I'm willing to help you out. So I think that's like one of the best things you can do in a crypto winter or bear market is just like make as many connections and like help other people out as much as possible, so they'll hopefully pay it forward to someone else and maybe back to you someday. But definitely reach out if you're building anything or just like want to bounce ideas. Happy to do so.
Thank you again, and this has been a really fun day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
this up. So before everyone breaks, I just want to thank you, Andrew. When I met you a year and a half ago, you brought a really awesome excitement, a lot of I saw tons of creativity, and I'm so glad you got to share that with all of us today. Thank you for talking on stage the whole day and, yeah, making this really cool. So thank you.